Josh Pacheco was 17 years old. He lived in Michigan with his parents and sisters, and by all accounts, he was a great kid. His sisters described him as funny and entertaining, and his parents described him as loving and caring. And Josh was also gay, and because of that, he was bullied severely by his classmates. One day, Josh went home, went to his garage, got into his truck, closed the door, turned on the ignition, and killed himself. He was found a little bit later with a note next to his body that simply said, "I'm sorry I wasn't able to be strong enough." This is Tavana Holton. Tavana was 15 years old. She lived in Florida. One day she broke up with her boyfriend. The very next day he posted a nude video of her on Twitter. And you can imagine what happened then. Other kids took the video and began circulating it on social media. And they began to cyberbully her. Tavana's mother found Tavana in the bathroom of their home with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to her head just a few days later. And this is finally 9-year-old Jamel Miles from Denver. Just weeks ago, he came out to his mother as gay. She was driving him home. He was in the back seat of the car. He said, "Mommy, I have something really important to tell you. I'm gay." And she said, "I love you anyway." And she said he looked so scared and so small in the back seat. But he told her that he was proud and he wanted to tell his classmates, which is what he did. And his classmates, in turn, bullied him and told him that he should die. 4 days later, he hanged himself. Now, these kids all had something, they all came from different backgrounds, they came from different parts of the country, but they all had at least one thing in common, and that is that their lives were cut short by what experts have called hyper-masculinity. And you might hear the term also referred to as toxic masculinity. Now, before I talk to you more about how hyper-masculinity plays a negative role in our society and how it harms children, I want to offer a disclaimer. There is nothing wrong with being masculine, okay? And there is nothing wrong with being a man, fortunately for me and many of you in the audience. Masculinity is basically defined as a set of traits that are associated with being a man. And depending on culture and context, some of those traits can be viewed as negative at times, other times they're viewed as positive. The same can be said for femininity. However, hypermasculinity is often, it's basically masculinity on steroids. And it's often characterized by a high degree of a high tolerance level for violence and aggression. So those of us who have ever witnessed road rage incidents, or if you've ever been to a fraternity party after lots of kegs of beer have been consumed, or if we've gone to sports bars during a really important game, we may have seen some hypermasculinity on display at that point. Hypermasculinity is also characterized by a callous disregard for the dignity of women. Women, sometimes through hypermasculine behavior, are treated as sex objects. And this kind of objectification leads to sexual assaults and sexual harassment. And finally, hypermasculinity is also characteristic of a sort of stoicism. Men who display hypermasculine behavior tend to conceal their emotions. They have a hard time emoting, except for anger, notably. But men that have these hypermasculine tendencies don't feel like they can show their true feelings, because to do so shows femininity, shows weakness, and therefore is bad. It's interesting because there's more and more research now that shows that hypermasculine behavior not only negatively impacts the victims of hypermasculinity, which are generally girls, LGBTQ kids, gender nonconforming people, but the biggest victims of hypermasculinity are boys and men, because this kind of behavior leads to all kinds of negative consequences, from psychological health consequences, physical health consequences, increased uses of substance abuse. And it's also interesting that some researchers like Niobe Way from New York University have linked hypermasculine behavior with loneliness among males. American men, which is unique in the world among men, American men tend to report that they either have few other male friends, and when they do, they have a hard time talking to their male friends about important life issues or emotions. And this is obviously a problem because it leads to all these negative consequences. And it creates sometimes a level of loneliness that increases as men age. And they report that their level of loneliness increases as they age. And public health officials are alarmed because loneliness now is seen as a risk factor for all kinds of negative health consequences and early death. So let me give you an example of something I'm talking about. A few weeks ago, I was shopping at Costco, which all of us do, right? And I couldn't help but overhear a young father with his son. The son was about 3 or 4 years old. The boy picked up a toy, and all I remember was that it was a pink toy. I don't remember what it was. And without missing a beat, the father said, "Put that back, that's for girls." And the boy, reflecting his father's disgust and revulsion, just threw it back and said, "Yuck, Daddy, that's for girls." Now, this kind of attitude leads to hypermasculinity, and it leads to all of the negative effects that I just talked about, and it leads to misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia. Given what we're experiencing in our world today, this issue is taking on more significance. Think about the news. What are we hearing? We're talking about the Me Too movement. We're talking about rampant gun violence, which, by the way, is almost exclusively perpetrated by boys and men. And we're talking about what I would consider a hyper-masculine culture in our White House. So it's a very important issue today, and it's taking on more significance. So this is me, and I'll get to me in a little bit, okay? I was introduced as a law professor. I am a law professor, and for many years, I've been doing a lot of work on bullying prevention. So early on in my work on bullying prevention, and I've gone around and trained lots of teachers and administrators around the state, early on I discovered something. The vast majority of bullying incidents are somehow, in some way, related to hypermasculine behavior. Whether the victim is a girl or LGBTQ, or a person with a disability, or even racial, ethnic, and religious minorities. What I found is that either the motivation for the bullying was hypermasculine, or the tactics used to bully were hypermasculine. And I became even more concerned when I started to review bullying-related suicides. And these are kids who have taken their lives because, at least in part, because of bullying. And what I found was that roughly 80% of the kids who take their lives because of bullying are boys who were gay or perceived to be gay, and girls who were the victims of gender-related or sexual bullying. So this obviously concerned me a lot, and I started to pay more attention to how hypermasculinity affects our kids. What's even more interesting about bullying prevention programs is that they don't discuss or address head-on how hypermasculinity and rigid gender norms affect our kids in school, and how we can improve the climate of our schools so that we can prevent bullying by addressing these issues. We just don't talk about it. What drives me crazy is this. I have been doing this work for a lot of years, and just a few years ago, there was this revelation in society that girls also bully. Big surprise. And all of a sudden, as a culture, as a society, we just globbed onto that, and we started talking about mean girls, and we coined this term, mean girls, because of course we need another way to vilify girls, right? And so then we made a movie about mean girls, and that's all we talk about. But the evidence related to bullying is clear. Still, the vast majority of bullying perpetrators are boys, and the vast majority of bullying victims are boys. But we don't talk about scary boys. We talk about mean girls. So, this is me. And you can tell, maybe from the picture, that I wasn't the most traditionally masculine kid, right? If you ask me why I was posed that way, I honestly don't have a good answer for you. You'll have to ask my mother. But, I was also I became very interested in this subject when I started to reflect on my own childhood and my experiences with hypermasculinity. So I grew up in a very loving, large Lebanese American family. I had 2 amazing, wonderful parents, 3 brothers, a sister. I did very well in school. I participated in clubs and sports. I was a student leader throughout high school and college. I had friends. I had girlfriends. So my memories should be good of childhood, right? They weren't. When I think of my childhood, I mostly have negative feelings. I was actually a pretty miserable kid. And I attribute that to the fact that I did everything in my power to conceal the fact that I was gay, and I did everything in my power to act like what I thought a boy should act like. And I'll tell you some of my most memorable experiences, and these are memories that they're pretty innocuous when you hear them, and they shouldn't really be that memorable, but for me they were. And here are some of them. So I remember in the 5th grade, I was brushing my friend Cheryl's long blonde hair, because that's what 10-year-old boys like to do, right? And I was brushing her hair, and the teacher from across the room yelled at me and said, "Robbie Salem, put that brush down. Boys don't brush girls' hair." And I was devastated. I was just deflated. And I wasn't just devastated because Cheryl's hair was a mess, but because I felt like I did something wrong. I committed a sin, and I didn't even know what it was. I'll tell you another time, another memory I had was when I walked into school. This was probably in the 6th grade, and I was wearing my cherry red pants. And a teacher called me up to the room and to the front, and in front of a couple of other kids, she said, "Robbie, don't wear those pants again. Boys don't dress that way." Now, I will give her this much. The pants were hideous, and they were also corduroys, so visualize that. But still, that was pretty cruel. And then I remember the time in middle school that I was carrying my books in front of my body like this, and a boy in the hallway laughed at me and called me a girl. And you better believe that from that point on, I carried my books on my side. And this was before backpacks were a big thing, so that's how we carried our books. And I just thought it was more practical to carry your books this way, but apparently not if you're a boy. So those memories sort of pale in comparison to some of the other things I overheard and experienced, like the time in high school when I overheard a group of boys laughing in the hallway and talking about a disease that is going around killing all the fags. So I tried really hard to fit in. I did my best. And I pretended that I liked watching sports on TV with my 3 sports-loving brothers, even baseball. So it was tough. And I did my best, but I was miserable. And like Josh, Tavana, and Jamel, who I showed you earlier, I often wanted to take my life. So, a few years ago, I started looking at pop culture and the messages that kids receive in pop culture. And think about the blockbuster movies, the movies that are most popular, not the best movies, but the movies that are most popular. If you Google blockbuster movies of 2017 and 2018, what you're going to see are all kinds of films that typify this hyper-masculine behavior that I'm talking about. These are films often with leading male characters who are tall and muscular and tough and stoic. And there's usually a woman or a girl in the movie that's going to ultimately become his romantic or sex partner. And you see fantastic explosions and fast cars and police chases, and these are the most popular movies. And the film and TV industry is not the only industry that's guilty of this. Here are some more movies, but the music industry is guilty of this. The ad industry is guilty of this. What the ad industry does when they want to target men is to talk about how men can reclaim their manhood. Men are back. Consider your man card reissued. Spray more Axe cologne and get more. Get more what? Imagine. And this problem also exists in our video game industry, which is a real problem for our young men today. And of course, we see it often displayed in the sports industry. So, a couple of years ago, the New York Times conducted a study on a feature that is Michael Kimmel, who's a scholar. And Michael Kimmel would poll his students, and he would ask them on a regular basis, describe what a good man is and describe what a real man is. And over time, he saw themes emerging. And here's what he found, that his students often described a good man as honest, caring, and selfless. And the same students would describe a real man as a take-charge, risk-taker, authoritative, never cry, and don't show weakness. So it's no wonder that men and boys are confused, and girls and women for that matter. Can you be a good man and a real man? It's really an open question in our society. There's all kinds of research that is really interesting about how we treat boys and girls differently based on our perceptions of how they should behave according to their gender. There's a fascinating study that was conducted by scholar Terry Real. He showed a video of a crying baby to hundreds of adult participants in this study. For some of the adults, he said the baby was a girl. Other adults, he said the baby was a boy. And he asked the adults to describe what emotion the baby was conveying. Overwhelmingly, the adults who thought the baby was a girl described her as scared, fearful. The adults who thought the baby was a boy described him as angry. So it goes without saying, and it's pretty logical, that we treat our kids differently. Well-intentioned parents treat their kids differently based on how we think they should behave according to their gender. Now, there's also all kinds of surveys out there that address what are the most injurious words that kids experience. When kids want to hurt other kids, what do they hear? What do they use? These are the most common insults. This is what hurts kids. Whore, bitch, slut, fag, gay, retard, all motivated by hypermasculinity. So it's no wonder that 85% of LGBTQ kids report being bullied in school. It's no wonder that 83% of girls report being sexually harassed in school. It's no wonder that an estimated 5.4 million students skip school on a regular basis during the school year because they don't want to confront their bullies. And get this, according to one study, most adolescent girls fear gaining weight more than they fear cancer, nuclear war, and losing a parent. We have a problem, folks, and we need to start taking this seriously. The problem doesn't have an easy solution. We're not going to resolve this overnight. But I think we can all do something in our own small ways. We can affect the people around us, the circle of people around us, by behaving in certain ways and being more aware of these toxic messages. First of all, let's acknowledge that hypermasculinity is a problem. Let's also acknowledge that misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia are inextricably linked. We're all in this together. Whether you're a man, woman, boy, girl, gay, straight, we're all in this together because this is harmful to society. And in our own little way, if you see a woman or a girl being harassed in the street, if you're comfortable, intervene. If you hear a homophobic joke being told in the locker room, do the brave thing and call it out for what it is, offensive. If your son wants to buy a pink toy at Costco, either buy it for him or at least don't shame him. I want to leave you with these faces, Josh, Tavana, and Jamel. I hope we don't just remember them today. I hope we honor them. Let's honor them by all changing our outlook on the messages that we receive, and let's all be more aware and help our kids. And if we can just start helping boys and men learn that in order to be a good man, in order to be a real man, you have to start by being a good man. Thank you.